Hey there, you guys all know me, Kaylee McMahon with the Apartment Queen. I have a special guest today, and we're going to talk about something that I'm actually really excited about. I actually have my notes in front of me because I've taken a couple negotiating classes. But I'm going to go ahead and let Sandhya introduce herself because I won't do it justice. And then we'll get into the guts of negotiating. I'm excited.
Hi, Kaylee. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I hope to add value to your listeners. Negotiating is one of my favorite topics. But to give you a background, I have a bachelor's and master's in electrical engineering. I also have an MBA, and I worked at Texas Instruments for over a decade on large programs for them. So contract negotiations with vendors was certainly something I learned along the way there in my real job, so to speak. But afterwards, and even before that, growing up first in India before I moved to Texas 30 years ago, we are always raised to bargain for everything. It's almost like when you go shop for something, you immediately offer half or 50% or less for an item. So we are not insulting people. That's just the way the conversations go. So I think it's something inbuilt in me right from the beginning. It's like a never, never pay full price, as the Marshall slogan goes. We're built to never pay full price for something or get some kind of a deal out of it. So all the sale ads and sale prices appeal to me because that's what it's all about. I need to feel like I made a deal, even if I end up paying the same price. If you tell me it's 50% off and then tell me what that price is, that's more appealing to me. So
how funny. Yeah.
Negotiating is important.
So it sounds like negotiating is second nature to you. And it's something that, for example, if you ever read there's a book called Women Don't Ask, and literally the crux of the entire book is about how women just don't feel comfortable asking because we're normally so good at picking up on what other people are thinking or feeling, but then we take on that thought or that feeling as like we're doing something wrong or we need to adjust our situation or our approach or our offer or whatever it is, and that's not necessarily the case at all. So just going ahead and asking for it, it sounds like your background or your history of your life is just where you've always been pretty comfortable just asking for what you want. Is that kind of the case?
Yeah, that's definitely the case. And, I'm not afraid of the worst case scenario, which is they are going to say no. They're going to say, how dare you ask for that? Or they may say it very nicely by saying, no, absolutely not. And then I'd be like, okay, so what can I get? This price is non-negotiable. Okay, if the price is non-negotiable, how about the terms? There's always something you can find that middle ground, as I call it.
So when you're dealing with a person, so for example, I definitely think that it's a different situation when you're negotiating for like a thing versus when you're always negotiating for a thing, but someone that's selling something that they're not emotionally attached to, such as like an item, versus someone who is emotionally attached to a property or they're financially attached to a property. You have to have pretty good negotiating skills to be able to figure out kind of what, first of all, like you said, kind of getting them to know, to figure out, they said no, but why no? Is it no because of this or this or this? Trying to understand and ask more questions, I think, once you've listened to them. Now, what would you say in real estate, for example, for an application, when you're trying to figure out what would get you to that lower price or better price? What do you do besides active listening to the person selling or the broker selling?
I always use my agents. So if it was single family, my real estate agent usually has a very good pulse on what is sort of like their lowball price and what would be an insult. So I always try to find that lowball price rather than an insult price. But then I take that lowball price and then I add something else to it. So for example, I would say pending a new roof or pending, a fully working sprinkler system or whatever that case might be. So, but then I only start at the lowest price I can start at.
Yeah.
And then I say, I'm sorry if they're offended, but this is why I need that price. So on a recent multifamily transaction, we were in best and final. And I had to go at a pretty low price, even in best and final. And I said, okay, I can offer $13 million plus a new roof. If I have a new roof, I'm good for this price. But if I have to fix the roof myself, or you're not replacing the roof, this is a flat roof, old 70s property with Mansard's, shingles. I'm going to have to replace it before I sell it. This was a short-term play in 3 to 5 years. So I'm going to either look at the increased cost of insurance or the cost of replacement of the roof or the perception of the next buyer if I don't replace the roof. So I put all that into a number, and that's how I negotiated that. And so you have to be pretty firm about what is your, threshold. And don't try to move the threshold to please someone else, because ultimately it'll put you in financial disaster. Whether it's your own personal funds for a single family or your passive investors for a multifamily. You really have to know that threshold and not come close to it right away in your first offer. Mm-hmm. You have to know that ceiling and come well below that for your initial offer, so you have wiggle room as you go through multiple rounds of negotiations.
So one of my favorite books is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. And I think one of the things that he talks about is knowing in your mind, I think it's like the 80% rule. So say if you were taking something and here's where I actually want to pay, here's the price that I think that I should pay, and then going to 80% of that in your head. But then starting much lower, like you're saying, like 40%, 50%. And it depends as well, like if there's an immense amount of competition, some of that needs to be adjusted a little bit. But really, getting that idea of where you need to start at. And then what do you do? My question is like, once you do that and you put together this offer like you're mentioning, and they say no, what do you do next?
Basically, I know what the price is. Is that the question?
Well, so when you put an offer forward where like, it sounds like you do a little bit of what I do, where instead of making it like, here's it, this is your only option, what I'll sometimes do is put in like 3 different options, basically. It's like, you can pick any of these 3, but like you said, they would say the whisper price or the price is whatever, but then you're like, okay, that's okay, but I need this, or but I need this and this and this, or this, So, but what if you make an offer and they just say like flat out no? Then where do you go?
Then the broker will tell me why it's no, or how far I was from what they wanted. And then are they open to a counteroffer, or am I just kicked out of the deal completely, right? So if I can make a counteroffer and I know what that threshold is and what that gap is, I can say, okay, I'm 100,000 off from the price. What can I get that would cost me 100,000 otherwise that I can put into my terms instead, right? And where else can I squeeze that 100,000 out of it?
Yeah.
So one of the things I always ask for is extra time to go in and do an earlier assessment. So early access is huge, because if you take your contractors in with you during those early access days, and you can very accurately really price out every little repair you'll have to do, maybe that right away will give you that 100K or at least a 50K. So that's a big one. So I ask for that before my money goes hard. That's a big one. Then even when my hard money goes hard, I try to stretch those dates. So if they want 100K on day one, I'll put it as maybe it's only 25K on day one and it's at, end of day. So I still have that full business day to continue my early access. So that's another way I do it. Another one is my extension. Like instead of having to close in 45 or 60 days, I might price out extensions and say I get free extensions or at a very low cost, because that gives me more time to, again, figure out more things about this property and negotiate more contracts, etc., out of it. So I'll buy time if I can't buy money. I'll buy early access if I can't buy money. Or I'll get freebies thrown in if I can't get money. Or, and I know there might be some brokers listening, but I actually see if the broker can cut some of their commission. I actually see if the lender can cut some of their commission. Because let's see, I'm looking for 100K, right? Well, I'm at 50K now, so I need to wiggle another 50K from somewhere. Where can I squeeze it out of, right? So I just ask, okay, what about my insurance quote? Maybe I should shop at 3 different places. If I can get 5K less on that, that's great. What about my tax protesting? Can I get another 5K out of that, right? Can I do some kind of an agreement where they take care of maybe all of this termite and pest control, etc., treatments the day before I take over the property? So then I don't have to do anything for at least 3 months. I mean, it's all the little things. But every little thing adds up to get you to that 100K to close that gap. So negotiate things when you cannot negotiate money.
Yeah, that is amazing, because like you're so right that sometimes like it does all add up to all the same figure at the end of the day, but sometimes people don't care. So sometimes a seller, for example, in real estate, like that's all. I'm like, what is their biggest thing that they care about? Some people like they want a quick close. Some people want all cash. Some people, most of the time the broker will say, because of course their job is to get the most out of the sale, they just care about the price. But that's not always the case. And so I think that's smart to add in like, well, what if we did this? And what if we did this? And what if we did that? Once they're kind of giving you a no. So yeah, that's one thing that like I wrote a little presentation up about when you get to know, that's the beginning, so then that's usually asking the other person like, well, what about this doesn't work for you? And then they can outline, what doesn't work. And like you're giving examples of would this work instead? And then you can kind of figure out, okay, well, how much amount of that? Or, like you said, oh, let's talk about pest control. And they're like, oh, that's reasonable. But then you're like, but it's for a year, and then they may say, well, I still think that's reasonable, but here's the cost. So I love that. I really do. And then once you get past no, and then the other party giving you some idea of why it's no, and then you come up with some creative solutions, then you're going to want to give like exact examples of what we're going to do. What would you do if, so for example, if you were dealing direct with a seller, or this is now an example where we're kind of removing the broker and negotiating, and if you're one-on-one with somebody, and if they just say no again, I've heard that you're kind of trying to, so for example, there's usually a reason that you guys have contact in the first place. Usually they're distressed, or they're getting a divorce, or I've dealt with one where mom died and it was held in a trust and the son took over and he had no idea what he was doing, whatever the situation is. So they have some need, and you thought you understood what that need is, but they're still sitting there telling you no, and you're trying to understand, what key phrases do you use to kind of get down to the bottom of like, well, why? Like, one thing that Chris Voss says is, have you given up on this, or have you changed your mind, or do you not want to sell anymore, or something that is kind of like you're picking the obvious thing that they want to sell, they whatever, but you kind of call it out to make them realize like, okay, I'm here to like work this out with you, or do you just want to give up on it altogether? What do you use to kind of get them to come back down to earth when they're just like, no?
Well, obviously, if I've spent this much time on it and gotten this far, it means I see value in that property and I want this asset. So I always like to phrase it as, you've done such a great job with this property and I really love this property. I really think I can take it to the next level by doing blah, blah, blah. I make a list, but then in my letter to them, if that's how I'm communicating or whatever, but then I say, well, what does it take? How can we make this work between the two of us, right? What is your pain point? How can we make this work? And what does it take? And actually, funny enough, in our most recent multifamily deal that we acquired, it turned out from an accounting standpoint, he needed to hit a certain number as his sale price. It was probably a little bit of pride as well, but somehow he could not accept a number below that X, which happened to be 9.3 million. We were stopped at about 9.1 million. So what ended up happening is we said, okay, do you want to find a more creative way of structuring this deal? So that last few $100K ended up being a form of seller financing. But what he got for it was a pref return. So he became his own Class C buyer. A Class A is your typical passive investor who's the first priority for you to pay. And then the Class B is the GPs who get paid. So we have the seller in a Class C, like Charlie, in his own class. And he got just a low pref return, like 4%, almost like he was my supplemental loan that I had to pay. So as soon as I paid my Fannie loan, I would pay him his 4%, and only then everybody else gets paid. And somehow that made him happy. And so now we have the sale price, and he only gets a 4% pref return. He does not get any equity split or anything else on the deal. So he's like a very low interest supplemental loan to me. I'm like, I'll take that any day. And that's how we made this deal work. So there is always a way. You just have to keep looking at it. But you have to decide in your head that I want to make this work. I like this deal enough that I want to make this work. This is my threshold, but what are the different ways I can get there? There is many flights that can, get you to Alaska, or there's many ways to get there on a boat, on a flight, or whatever else.
Yeah.
Helicopter, whatever. But you have to decide, I want to get to Alaska,
now,
as a destination.
When the seller said, when you said, what is it going to take? And the seller said, my price. Did you kind of give him a list of ideas, or how did you do that without overwhelming the person? Because there are, like you said, a bazillion ways to do things. You can buy their shares. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff.
I say that we are about this much away from your price. I'm trying to see how we can cover that gap. In terms of lender and loan, also we're at this level. Would you like to take a piece of it? Would you like to invest with us in it instead of just getting out of the deal yourself? So the concept of seller financing sometimes might work as well. That's so owner good. Financing, seller financing is another approach to it, that financially you can figure out the math and say, okay, I'm reduced from this hassle, et cetera, especially in smaller single family or small multifamily loans. I'm seeing seller financing is getting increasingly popular because they get a similar return. They still feel like they own that property, but then they get all the headaches taken out because you're now asset managing it.
Exactly. Now, how do you make sure that it's a done deal? For example, obviously we know that we have paper contracts, that come later. But for example, if you're a real estate broker or whatever, and then you have how do you say it, an audible yes, like, oh, that sounds like that will work. Do you reconfirm with them one more time? Because one technique that they do say about in the Never Split the Difference novel is to basically make them say it out loud. So trying to get to a yes. So for example, so we just talked about the fact that what we're specifically going to do is we're going to have you stay in the deal. We're going to give you this percentage preferred return. Preferred return works like that. And then you'd say, is that right? And then they would say yes, like getting them to definitely say yes. Do you make sure to do that?
I like things in writing, even if it's email form. Yeah. While our lawyers are working out the PSA, I like to do the email at least agreement of whatever we verbally agreed to. Yeah. So once we said, okay, so you like this idea, so I'm going to send you something, look over it, to reply and let me know if you like it or what we need to change. Make your edits and send it back to me. Yeah. So I still make sure it's in writing, so there is no misunderstanding. And then when we get that, we make the offer and then the LOI gets accepted, then we get our legal teams involved.
Yeah, got it. Okay, that is perfect. Get it in writing for sure. And then if we're trying to, so I'm going into like the weeds, I think right here in front of my little presentation that I made, because there's all these techniques. Like for example, I think what we started off talking about was the haggle part, and the haggle is like when this person, like you have no idea what their anchor is. Are they emotional? What do they really want? Those are the things that we're trying to kind of figure out first. But sometimes people just want to get down to the haggle, kind of like, when you have a listed deal in real estate, and that's kind of where they're at that point. We're not fact finding. So the haggle. So for example, I've dealt with this before, and I want to see how you deal with this situation. I wish I would have had your help, honestly. There was a deal in Plano that the seller was living in the deal, and long story short, she wouldn't give a price to the broker so that he couldn't give us an idea of what the heck she wanted, and the property was 70% occupied. So that means that, like, for me to explain to whoever's watching, that when you're looking at a business that doesn't have a certain set of income that it should, meaning rents from the occupants, that the business is valued less because there is not that income there. So the reasonable value for this deal was, X amount, and this person wouldn't even give us a ballpark. Like, do you want 5 million more than that? Do you want no million? What do you want? And so when I was asking the broker, I was trying to fact find and figure out, do they want to keep anything in the property? Like trying to get a gauge for how emotionally attached they were to the thing. And, are they for sure going to retire in 100%? This is the only option. They're not going to change their mind, that they don't want to sell if they don't get the right price. But he would not give me a barometer for what the heck the price was. So really what I did was I went and looked at what the value of the property was. At the time. Now I know that, who I was up against. Now I know who all those people were. And now, honestly, I told all of them, I was like, because a bunch of them were women, I was like, we just need to get together next time and literally talk.
I know what you're talking about. The grindstone.
Yeah. And so it was just like, anyway, that he wouldn't give a price. And so when I was trying to get an idea, all I could go off of was, what the business showed. But I almost skip traced her number and called her.
So I think the problem was with a deal like that, there are so many unknowns that I think you have to imagine once you take over such a property and 6 months into it, where you would be at, and price it competitively so you get into the next round. And that I think it works very well if you have a way to finance it. So when we approached that deal, we talked to bridge lenders, we talked to private lenders, et cetera, to see at what number we could make that property work. And so that helped us set our price. But we knew we didn't want to go as high as ultimately what it sold for, because we didn't want to take that risk for the near term. I think if I was more capitalized, like where I would be at 3 to 4 years from today, I would have taken on that risk because I know that location so well. My son went to school around the corner from that location. So I literally drove by it every day for like years. So I know that property that well inside and out in terms of its potential. But I couldn't take the financial risk just because when I look at the opportunity cost of my putting that much into that deal versus just, spending an hour analyzing a stock and putting money into it, like I made so much more money with stocks that it's like, okay, why do I want to tie my money up on a property like that? And, the problem was they also had all the rents going month to month, and it was a very large tenant base who had stayed there for a long time. So if one person gets wind of something and everyone finds out, the fear was also that we'd have a mass exodus all at one time. And so that was another risk that we didn't want to take at that time, because we would be raising money from passive investors too. And so there's a lot of factors that go into figuring out at what is my threshold, what is my pain threshold, and at what point I have to walk away from a deal. So I think I'm going to look forward to the next time this deal comes up again and see what the price points are at that time, because the phenomenal location is going to lend itself to a really good asset.
Yeah, so trying to do some discovery on like what the price could have been. I really like your in the real estate world, but your example here is fact finding kind of what other people value it at. And so sometimes, like for example, when women are negotiating their salaries, that's the number one first thing you need to do is go look at what will the market bear for that and have a comparison and know exactly. So that's kind of what we do with our rent comparables and kind of what we do with cap rates, looking at what sold recently, that kind of thing. But then also when it comes to utilizing, like you said, your lender, probably your insurance, like people that would actually come up with some kind of value who are already on your team to reference, to know kind of where a starting point is, because the hard part with having that kind of broker in the way sometimes is they can't get a temperature on the person. So that's very smart. Kind of take all your resources and make an educated guess, if you will, kind of.
Well, ultimately it's your lender, right? Your lender has to lend you that money with confidence. Otherwise, you can't buy the property. You could be under contract, and suddenly if you don't have someone who lend it to you, where's your financing? So it's easy to start there, because whatever property you want to acquire, whoever is your lender, right? It's a major lender, it's a direct lender to Fannie or Freddie, or it's a bridge lender, et cetera. They need to underwrite the property and agree with you on the price. And I think that's where you start.
Yeah.
So without them, you can't buy it, because they are the majority owner of the property once you buy it, like 70-30, 80-20, et cetera.
Right. Yeah, that's smart. And then so one thing that the book that I keep referencing is Never Split the Difference. I've had to read it like 4 times. Is this thing called an extreme anchor, when somebody forces you into haggling. So that's actually what I did on this property specifically. Is I was like, well, he's not going to give me a barometer for like what's high, what's low, nothing. I'm like, F it, I'll just go super low, whatever. And because they know that I can close and I'm a legitimate person, that I did get into the second best and final, but I think like I was the lowest of all of them, you know what I mean? And the next one, I think comparable, I would have to come up like $1 million or something like that. And I was like, no, I tried to kind of go the route of like, well, what else can we negotiate, as far as repairs or this, but just based on the person, that wasn't the thing. But that was something I had to learn, is that, when someone forces you into the haggle, I mean, it's always best if you can get them to answer first, them to give you some kind of barometer for like where their brain kind of is. But yeah, if you have to be forced into saying the first, call it first or whatever, I've found that go ahead and just, what did you say, 40%, 50%, so, something super crazy low. And then at that point, they could even say no, but then we start back at that process where then you're fact finding and say, oh, well, you said no. Why is it no? And then figuring out kind of where to go from there. So yeah, I do like that, you're ready to haggle. And then have you ever heard of the term, the black swan?
Yeah.
like when someone has their black swan, that's something that in negotiating I have used, but unsuccessfully, unfortunately. I'm just curious if you've been able to do that, because really what that is figuring out, like, what can this person not, like, what can they not live without? What is their thing? How do you get to that point of figuring out, like, what their thing is? And again, in multifamily, most of the time it's just money, it's the price or whatever. But I guess in life in general, how do you figure out, like, what that thing is?
Usually in multifamily, like you said, it's not as an urgent thing unless it's a forbearance deal or something like that, and they have to get out of it right away. But even then, you don't know if like one of the sellers also has a divorce or some other life event happening in their world for which they got to get out of it quick. So getting that list of, say, forbearance deals, foreclosure deals in the case of single family, any of those kind of things would put them in an extreme situation where they might have a greater urgency to sell. Like they've made the decision to get out of this property. That's not going to change. It's just a matter of who's going to be the buyer or the scapegoat who's going to pay that high price for it. Or how can you negotiate that? Like I know, like in our case, when we acquired this recent property, this was from a single sole owner who had 1031 exchange a bunch of single family rentals for buying his large multifamily. But he was remote. He was in the West Coast. Why would he have one property in Dallas with no one boots on the ground to help him and left to a property management company? So there were constantly problems and repairs. He didn't supervise all of it, so they just did Band-Aid fixes, and it was so expensive for him. So there was truly a reason for him to want to get out of it quick. And so finally he picked us as the group because he knew we could close by December. And the way we could cover that gap, again, like I explained earlier, is by having him sort of finance a small piece of the deal
to the
extent of supplemental loan. So there's always a way to get around it, but you don't realize it until you keep digging. It's like peeling the layers of an onion, you know? You don't really know what's going on until you go several layers in, and then you're like, aha, that's the reason why you're selling, or that's what's pushing you to making this decision.
Now, I've got one final question that is being really kind of vulnerable, me being vulnerable and me being transparent about kind of how I felt in these negotiations or in life in general. So sometimes, like, I've got a guy's business card right now that this is no longer a deal. We went, whatever, and went through the whole thing together on this deal. But I felt very uncomfortable. It was an older gentleman. And usually it's older white guys, in this industry that you have to communicate with. And so I knew that a phone call would probably be more appropriate than a text or an email. So I would call him, and what would happen is that we would go, okay, here's what you'll keep, here's how much you'll stay in the deal, here's the terms you want, here's whatever. And I'm basically just trying to maneuver stuff to get to his price. And so essentially, this is a situation where I was trying not to trigger a sale, so to trigger that tax. And so I was like, this is what you're going to save in tax to kind of compare it. So each step of the way, I had a few questions I would forget to ask. Like, for example, like, how much equity do you and your partners have in the deal? We could figure out a way to buy out your partners and then keep you in and not have to even trigger a real estate sale, like all these kinds of things. I felt very uncomfortable calling him because I wanted to respect his time and not bother him and become like a fly, but at the same time, you do have to get these questions answered. Do you have any advice for a better format when you're negotiating with a seller? Sit down and have coffee together? Because I did offer that, and he was kind of like, I'm busy, What would you suggest as far as when you get to that point, someone's interested in doing something creative, not to, be bugging him once a day, but still be able to get it done?
Have you tried email? Because a lot of them do like email. And one thing I do is I have my list of questions in a notepad before I start the conversation so that I have it as a checklist that I go through. So I don't forget something. And I put it under categories. So financing, equity share, what are the negotiable terms, non-negotiable terms? Is there an urgency to sell by a certain date? For example, in our case, he really wanted to close in 2020. That was very important to him. So just things like that. What are the pain points? What are the negotiable things in there? What will he not come down on? And in your case, it was tax benefits, right? So within tax benefits, what are some questions to ask that your accountant would want you to include if you were having this conversation with them? So I go, like, even with my lawyer, I have a call with my lawyer ahead of time before I start negotiating to say, what am I allowed and not allowed to do kind of And so I send him a list of questions and he emails back saying, ask this, but don't ask this kind of thing. So I ask all my experts to help me around the questions. So what can I negotiate even from my lender's point of view? What would give me better terms? So a greater LTV, right? If I wanted almost 80% LTV, that might, for example, reduce the IO period I get. Where are my things? So if I raise more and I only do 70% LTV, maybe I'll get more IO. And that gives me better cash flow initially because this is a deep value add. So just things like that. So I speak to all of my experts about things I can negotiate. And then I make a list. And then it's right here before I make that call. So that I'm just checking off all these points. And that makes it a lot easier when I'm mentally organized because now I've thought through all of it. I have typed it up. It's in print in front of me. And so it's not just on my laptop screen. It's also in writing. So sometimes I can scribble more quickly than make typing noises as I'm talking to someone.
Right.
Because then it feels like, oh, you're not even paying attention to me. You're typing away something.
Right.
So whatever works for you for that person's personality type, I would do it.
That would have been smart for sure. And that obviously comes with experience.
Yeah. And to record your phone call if there's a way to do it.
Yeah, there's a way. There's always a way. You've got my laptop where we can do the voice recording from the phone or, vice versa. So, yeah.
Exactly. So all of that helps.
Yeah, that's great. Now, if you're newer in the industry and you're trying to figure out a way to have those questions ready, I've found a list of questions like that from like Rod Khleif, for example. He has his... I'm going to say it wrong, but his boot camp basically, and there was a list of questions. Where did you get your initial list, or is it just literally from experience?
A lot of my questions are just from experience, but I also went through another apartment investment program. It's through Brad Sumrock. Mm-hmm. So definitely as I watch his training videos and stuff, there are basic checklists. So then I immediately take them into a checklist. What's a checklist I should take with me when I drive by a property?
Right.
Things to look for, right? Yeah. And then I just voice record them. I take on a video and I keep speaking to that audio or video recording as I take it. So I just hold my phone camera to my thing. So I'm already videoing the property and I keep talking about it. So then when I get home, I already have it. I don't have to, again, compile a set of notes. And then if I'm not doing that property, okay, delete the video and I'm done. Or put it in my, deals not pursuing folder. And then I always have it for next time.
Oh my God, that's great. Seriously.
Because every 3 years, the same property is going to come back up for sale. So now you have history.
Wow.
So yeah. Things like that.
That is a huge gold nugget, I would say. Thank you so much for sharing that.
It's more efficient, right? Because time is short and it's hard to just pull over and start writing on a clipboard or typing into something. So this is just easy. I talk and it transcribes and it's easy if I need it.
Yeah. And then like I mentioned to you earlier, I use a app that's called acta.ai. And that's one that, because I've done it on my phone before where you're recording. And if you're literally able to, it's hard for me, not filibuster, not fill in words and not add stuff. If you're like, shingles are blue, this needs to change. This, you know what I mean? Like just making points. That app is like 100% accurate as far as getting what you're actually saying, where, like when you're using your voice to text, it's always messed up. And that thing works really well. And then when you're done with it, then you can transcribe and use those words. So I don't know if that would be useful or whatnot, but I mean, I think it's genius.
Yeah, very useful. I like the visual also from the video because when you tour a lot of properties, it's easy to forget. So there's something distinctive. So I make sure I video the signage and then go in. And then I also say the name of the property. We're touring property X, which is this many doors in this city. And this is the whisper price. And it's listed by this broker. That's my intro, so we're just driving around to see if this is worth a second look.
That is awesome. Wow.
And then I put the things I note.
So today, with us talking about negotiating, with us talking about real estate and negotiating together, I think we've come up with at least a handful of really good key points that are really important for anyone who's learning how to negotiate in real estate. So I'm really excited to listen to this again. If anyone that is listening to this video or watching this video later would like to get a hold of you, what is the best way to ask questions?
My website is the easiest way to reach me, and it's multifamilyforyou.com, where the 4 is a number 4 and it's YOU spelled out. So multifamily number 4you.com, and you can put in your name and email address. You can get a free passive investors checklist to vet a sponsor if you would like, or just send a message to set up a call with me or any other information I can help you with. And it doesn't sign you up for any future spam or messages. I want to clarify that. I hate spam.
Perfect. Everybody does. So thank you so much for being on today, and I look forward to hopefully having you on again. Everybody, thank you for tuning in today, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, Kaylee.
You got it.